Hello, everybody. Well, we are back from our break, and we are very excited to go ahead into this next session with an amazing group of speakers. We'll be talking about adapting to extreme temperatures in cities, session number 5 of our workshop. And I would like to welcome Morgan Richmond, who's the Senior Analyst at the Climate Policy Initiative, Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr, the Mayor of Freetown, Sierra Leone, Mayor Kate Gallego from the city of Phoenix, Arizona, Eleni Merivili, who's the Chief Heat Officer of the city of Athens in Greece, and Jane Gilbert, who's the Chief Heat Officer of Miami-Dade County in Florida. To moderate this session, we have with us Kurt Schickman, who's the Director of the Extreme Heat Initiatives at the Adrian R. Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. We know that one of the most severe effects of climate change is that of extreme temperatures. For example, extreme heat kills more people than all other climate-related hazards combined. That's what we're talking about. So it is a very important issue to discuss for urban life, and that's why we're so thrilled to have this fantastic group of speakers and our moderator to talk about it today. Please, Kurt, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Mauricio. And I think you said it well. And I really appreciate the opportunity to do a little bit of a deep dive into one of the core urban resilience challenges of our time, which is what to do about extreme heat and rising temperatures in our cities. Heat is often referred to as the silent killer. It claims more lives every year than any other natural disaster, but its effects are often less visible, and awareness of the risk therefore remains relatively low in many places. It's also an expensive challenge. It's costing our cities billions of dollars every year across a staggering array of urban systems. And of course, it's an unjust challenge as well. The negative effects of heat across all those urban systems and human conditions are disproportionately borne by marginalized and under-resourced communities. And so it's a problem that is just begging for investment and action. And therefore, I feel extremely fortunate to be sharing this stage with an amazing group of leaders, thinkers, and doers that are working on this challenge every day on extreme heat to hear from. And so I'd love to turn to each of you for initial remarks about how you are each addressing heat, how you are engaging the public and other actors, and how you pay for the work that you're doing. And so I'd like to start first by turning to Morgan Richmond to provide us with a bit of an overview here. Your role gives you a great view of the landscape of urban climate finance and how it can be applied to the challenge of heat. So I'm wondering if you could just share your thoughts on that with us.
Great, thanks, Kurt. And hi all, really nice to be with you. So by way of brief background to begin, Climate Policy Initiative is an analysis and advisory organization with expertise in finance and policy. And relevant to today's conversation, CPI is Secretariat of the City's Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, which is a coalition aimed at closing the investment gap for urban subnational climate projects and infrastructure. The Alliance has published research on the volume of finance to cities to address climate risks, including extreme heat, as well as research on avenues to leverage insurance and other risk transfer mechanisms in particular to address a broad range of climate risks, again, including extreme heat. So from that, a few initial thoughts to frame today's discussion. First is that hundreds of cities each year respond to CDP's Cities questionnaire, which asks cities to report on environmental action taking place in cities. Many of you, I think, are probably well aware of these reporting. And the responses are a valuable way to capture a sense of how cities are thinking about climate risks. And CPI, along with Adrian Arsht, reviewed the more than 800 responses from cities to the 2019 questionnaire and found that the 800 plus cities that responded to the questionnaire reported a collective of nearly 3,200 projects aimed at addressing 36 identified climate hazards. The reported cost of implementation of those projects totaled more than $35 billion. And of the more than 3,000 projects that were reported by those 800 plus cities, nearly a quarter, more than 500 projects targeted extreme hot temperature risks within cities. So these responses indicate what I think will come through within the remarks of many on this panel, which is that cities understand that they face risks for extreme hot temperatures and have lots of projects and efforts underway and or planned that can address the risks. The kinds of projects that are reported span what Berkeley law has captured as 5 categories of extreme heat response, which are natural, built, social, communication, and planning infrastructure. In the natural infrastructure space, that includes increased tree canopy, green roofs, corridors in urban areas that provide ventilation. Stuttgart, for example, has created a number of ventilation corridors throughout the city. Built infrastructure describes cool roofs and pavements, shade structures, building design improvements. The city of Las Vegas has upgraded many of its highest energy consuming municipal buildings and constructs new facilities to LEED standards, aiming to improve efficiency of units, in part to decrease and mitigate high heat events. Social infrastructure captures efforts like cooling centers and subsidized transportation. The city of Houston, for example, activates a heat emergency plan and opens cooling centers in the event of heat waves. And then the final 2, communications infrastructure, captures early warning systems and public information campaigns. And planning infrastructure includes zoning policies and urban design programs. Beyond the examples I've captured briefly here, I'm really looking forward to hearing from colleagues on this panel regarding many more efforts that I know are underway. Finally, I'll note that all of these efforts, as Kurt mentioned, of course, require funding. CDP cities responses indicate that the cost of the projects reported by cities to that questionnaire varies significantly across climate hazards, and of the projects reported to CDP with a specified cost value, projects responding to extreme heat totaled $279 million USD for that year of reporting. It's likely that orders of magnitude more finance will be needed to respond to accelerating urban heat events. In total, by 2050, World Bank estimates 10 to 20 billion USD will be needed to safeguard urban infrastructure across the wide range of climate risks. And the avenues for funding responses to extreme heat are varied, and I'm looking forward to talking more about them. They include municipal bonds, insurance, project debt and equity, public-private partnerships, grants. So I'll stop there to as sort of tee up remarks, and looking forward to today's conversation about the many avenues cities have.
Great, that's really helpful, Morgan. Thanks so much. Now I'd like to turn to Mayor Gallego. First of all, thank you so much for making time for this session today. Your city in Phoenix has long faced the challenge of heat and really been a leader on evaluating and implementing solutions, both in a pilot phase and early at scale too. Would love to hear your thoughts on how you approach the challenge of heat in Phoenix and how you're looking to engage the public and other stakeholders in that process.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you for convening this important conversation. By background, I have an undergrad environmental degree and then an MBA from the University of Pennsylvania. So super excited to be back with my people. And I feel like with the undergrad environmental degree and then the MBA, like this is the meeting I've been waiting to be invited to. So thank you for having it. It is also wonderful because for me, it's my first time being with Mayor Aki-Sawyerr and the city of Athens since we convened in Glasgow. We had a great conversation with cities that have created heat offices, and you have so many of the leaders globally in heat as part of this conversation. So we love working together, but to me, this is a little bit historic because it's our first convening with the United States-based organization in the US of global cities that are really on the forefront of heat. So thank you again for having this. Phoenix is really conscious of heat, and part of the reason I wanted to be here today is to talk about what we're doing in that area. We have a permanent Office of Heat Response and Mitigation as part of government here, and that is a chance for us to have a whole of government approach to addressing heat. Both heat and climate are incredibly important to us as a desert city with very hot summers. We have major impacts on our vulnerable populations as well as all of our residents, and we want to make sure we are on the forefront of that. Our office looks at a variety of solutions, from one that Mayor Aki-Sawyerr is very familiar with, tree planting, where she's been a leader and we hope to be as well, to the built environment. How do we make Phoenix the destination for innovative building companies that want to pilot new technologies that have great solutions, as well as for research about what are the best places for governments and private sector partners, nonprofits, philanthropy to put their dollars to impact heat and to reduce impacts, particularly on those who are most vulnerable. Heat and climate are a huge challenge to us. We have very warm summers and particularly warm summer nights. Our desert ecosystem used to cool down significantly overnight, and now with more asphalt and buildings, we are not as much. So people who are sleeping outdoors are much more vulnerable with that heat. For that reason, we are looking at creating cool corridors throughout our cities, areas where at least 60% of the area is shaded and with materials that are much more likely to absorb heat. We're also looking at cool pavement. So we have found a coating that we put on our streets that reduces the temperature 10 degrees, which is enough that you can feel it. Not that as mayor, I would recommend you going out into our streets and putting your hand on them, but when government can come up with solutions that creates a more comfortable environment, it's really meaningful to our residents. We have a partnership with Arizona State University, which has helped us get that data about 10 degrees cooler at the surface. And they've also been finding that when you don't have as much heat retention in pavement, you don't get as much potholes. So there's always jokes about mayors and potholes, but that is a really positive benefit for me as well. We're paying for these through a wide variety of partnerships, and I think we'll get into that as this conversation progresses, but we hope we have some ideas that we can share with all of you that will be helpful. And if you have ideas to share with us, we would welcome those as well. Since I am a Penn alum and Benheim Fellow and some other programs, there's often opportunities to do fellowships in our office. And so if you're looking for a home for innovative research, do think of us in Phoenix. We want to be on the forefront of finding solutions on heat and climate.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Mayor Gallegos. I'd like to turn now to Jane Gilbert. Jane, you're the world's first chief heat officer and therefore the person with the coolest title in the room today. And you live and breathe Miami-Dade County's work to respond to rising temperatures. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how you've approached that role over the last year that you've been in it.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. And thank you, Mayor Gallego. It was really great to hear the leadership of Phoenix on this issue. So my position, Mayor Daniela Levine Cava created this position as a result of two things. One, a group of community-based organizations doing a series of focus groups and surveys in our communities. You know, Greater Miami has been known internationally for its risks to sea level rise and flooding, and heat was not as much on our radar. We've been leading in our planning and implementation on those issues, but extreme heat amongst particularly our lower income, more marginalized populations was a top concern as it relates to climate change. And our mayor heard that, and also as a result of being involved with the Archrock Resilience Center, decided with Adrian Arce to put together this position, as Mayor Gallego mentioned, a whole government approach, but also to work with we have a regional resilience plan called Resilient 305 to work as a county with our municipalities, with our health department, our National Weather Service, and our universities and community-based organizations. So we put together a heat health task force that involves many of those different stakeholders, and we've been holding a series of public workshops. And the goal is to create a short-term 3-year implementation plan to improve coordination across departments and partners, sectors, and accelerate initiatives that are already underway, whether that is around emergency preparedness and response, or our mitigating urban heat islands, or public education and outreach, or policies around outdoor workers. We will have actions related to each of those areas, and each of those have a different funding stream and strategy as well. So we started out last summer. I started in June, so we needed to hit the ground running in terms of raising awareness through a series of social media and traditional media outreach, posters in our 3 languages here, and and outreach through summer camps and partnership with the National Weather Service to up our messaging through the traditional media and meteorologists. We learned a lot from that, and this year the mayor has determined that May 1st through October 31st will be an official heat season, and we will be doing a public education campaign on the level that we have historically and with hurricane preparedness. And so that will truly reach all homes and in all languages, doing a lot more outdoor media, partnerships with corporate sponsors, and various community-based partners outreach. We, in addition to the task force planning, have been conducting a heat vulnerability assessment. So we both need to get information from these different stakeholders and people who are impacted, potential implementers, but also get better data. We had not had good data on what are the highest cases of heat-related illnesses and deaths here in Miami-Dade County, and what populations are most at risk. It's not fully completed, but certainly lower income residents and outdoor workers are some of our most vulnerable in areas with the highest urban heat islands. So those are all areas that will help inform our intervention strategies. When you talk about financing, we had to make sure that heat was part of our hazard mitigation, local mitigation strategy in order to be eligible for FEMA funding. Historically, FEMA funding's been very focused on where infrastructure gets damaged as a result of weather-related events, whether it's a flood or a hurricane, but not as much about what kind of infrastructure do you need to protect human lives in the event. In Miami, it's really in the event of a widespread and extended power outage. So we're looking for FEMA support for the backup power needed at our evacuation shelters, at our cooling centers, and our low-income multifamily housing, but also maybe through our partnership with the utility, because it's really critical to them to make sure that they can keep lives safe in the event of a power outage. With the cool pavements, we're looking forward to start our piloting. We're also building on several tree canopy initiatives that we have here. Million Trees Miami has been going on for 10 years now, with many corporate sponsorships on our planting, as well as an Adopt a Tree program, allowing residents giving away shade and fruit trees to local residents and to our institutional partners in the areas of the lowest tree canopy. Those are programs that we're currently, as part of our heat action plan, looking to accelerate. I could go on, but I know we want to get to Q&A and more dialogue, so I will turn it back to you, Kurt. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was a wonderful overview of all the work that's going on there in such a short amount of time. I'd love to turn now to Mayor Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr from Freetown. Mayor Aki-Sawyerr, under your leadership, you've attracted global attention and engagement to heat in Freetown and the expansion of urban tree canopy there, similar to what we just heard from Miami. And I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts about your approach to urban heat and tree canopy, and how it's financed, and how you gain public support for it, both in the city, but also globally, as you've done.
Thank you very much. Yes, we've been really fortunate to have a platform where we've been able to get global attention, as you've said, but also get city engagement. I'll take it in two steps. First, just a word on what it is we've sought to do in terms of the tree cover, increasing the canopy. Freetown, the Tree Town, is the name of our initiative. We're planting 1 million trees, and it's the components of it have been such that we've had citizen resident involvement from the get-go. We launched the idea back in January 2020 at a dinner, at a mayor's ball. just putting it out there to the city, making it a funded event, a paid for ticketed event. So we already got that conversation going. And then with the little money that we raised from that, we did our first set of tree giveaways, literally seedling giveaways. So again, you know, having centers around the city in deprived communities, as well as in more affluent, where we were just really sharing the concept of planting trees as part of our climate mitigation action and consequently heat reduction. Although at that point, heat was not as much of the conversation as water protection, water source protection. We then scaled up from that sort of engagement and involvement into a full-blown program, which we were able to pitch to the World Bank and got funding for the first 557,000 trees that have already been planted, were funded largely from the World Bank. The next lot of 450,000 trees are being funded through a competition we entered with Bloomberg Philanthropies, the Global Mayor's Challenge. We came among the top 15, which meant we won $1 million. So very sort of different, as you can see, different funding sources. And it's been a question of being creative as we've gone along. We've also had the benefit of diaspora, Sierra Leoneans abroad, who have gotten involved with raising money, targeting just our media campaign. So it's been a very interactive, evolving process. The net result is being able to plant those trees, some of them very fast growing. All of them will eventually have the benefit of increased tree cover, canopy cover, heat reduction, but importantly, job creation in the process. And I think this is something we mustn't miss with our conversations around heat. In the same way, when we talk about climate change, climate action, we should always remember that those actions will invariably lead to, if designed right, green jobs. The same is true of our work in the heat arena. So here we've created jobs with those who monitor the growth of the trees, because we always say Freetown, the tree town, is not just planting trees, it's growing them. So we actually have over 600 jobs, young people who are now part of ensuring these trees are managed, they're looked after, they're tracked. We have a tree tracker app, a digital app, which means that all trees have a unique identifying number and their progress is the basis for the payments to the workers. And we're moving one step beyond now with the Bloomberg Philanthropy Prize. We are taking it beyond the planting, beyond the growing, and we're now designing a carbon offset framework to enable us to see if we can, well, not even to see, but definitely to enter the carbon market, to build sustainability. And finally, we've already began an impact token concept where you can invest in the trees through retail. So we have a fashion designer who has a QR code on t-shirts and hats, which is linked to our tree tracker app. By buying a product, you are investing in an existing tree and planting into future trees. So it's a sort of multi-pronged, multi-faceted approach, all of which has the net result of increasing tree cover, increasing canopy cover, reducing heat, creating jobs, ensuring that we protect our water catchment areas, which in turn are required waters needed, and to ensure that we're able to keep heat down. So that in a nutshell is what we've done and where we're going in respect of that element of our heat work. But there is more that we're doing, which is heat specific. But as far as tree cover goes, I would say that's it in a nutshell.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Mayor Aki-Sawyerr. It's wonderful to hear the progress going on in Freetown. And last, certainly in terms of time in the day for her, is I would introduce Leone Mirvili, who's the first European Chief Heat Officer for the city of Athens, one of the hottest big cities in Europe. Leone, I would love to hear from you as to how you've approached this work, both as a Chief Heat Officer and in all your work leading up to this, which is touched on heat in Athens.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you to the previous panelists. I'm very honored to be among you. Mayor Aki-Sawyerr, so inspiring to hear what you were talking about with the trees. I wish we had exactly the same going on in Athens. Exactly the same. It sounds really brilliant. So, I would like to, so the way that we're approaching dealing with heat in Athens, since this crazy last summer that we had, the temperatures in Athens reached 45 degrees Celsius and stayed over 40 for several days. And we had a large amount of people losing their lives. We've approached the issue in three kind of major categories. The first is awareness raising, as you said, Kurt, and as Mauricio said, it's still an issue. People are not conscious enough and kind of clear enough as to what are the dangers and the risks of rising heat, the type of heat that we're expecting, which bodies are not made for, and our cities are definitely not made for. So part of it, a big chunk, is awareness raising. The other thing, which Jane also discussed a lot and has done a lot of work, is preparedness and kind of warning systems and all of the work of actually making sure that when it happens, when the heat wave happens, we protect the people that are the most in danger. And the third pillar, which is a big one and requires the most funding, is redesigning our cities, which is a very big issue because our cities are really not made for heat. And the whole kind of way that we have created cities within modernity and within the logic of fossil fuels have created cities that are really, really death traps for us. So I'll very quickly talk about two things. The first one goes into the first pillar, which is the awareness raising pillar, which is something that I'm very excited about, which we're doing together with the Adrian Arch Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. The scientists from the science committee are working together with the scientists in Athens and meteorologists, and they're creating a new algorithm which puts together meteorological data and health data so that it creates categories of heat waves. So this summer, we're going to, for the first time, to pilot a new type of categorization for heat waves that actually organizes these categories and these heat waves based not just on how high the temperature is, but also what is the risk to the health of the people, what percentage of risk each category brings to the people of the city. And this is based on data that we have been collecting for decades of different types of temperatures and different types of meteorological data, as well as health data, mortality and morbidity data for the last several decades, so that we've created this methodology that we can now start kind of looking for. And just to kind of put that into perspective, I want people to consider how, because we don't have categories and we don't have kind of clear ways of understanding what the risks are, I just want to have people think that how, for example, when we have a category 4 hurricane, we don't expect that people will deliver pizzas to our houses, or that, you know, there will be, you know, people just kind of going along working on the fields or in construction. Like, these are things that we don't, because we don't have the data and we don't have the ways of organizing data and knowledge, is the reason why we're really kind of excited about trying and piloting this type of categories and linking to them the right type of actions and measures to make this actually make sense, because now it's all ad hoc. And the other thing, very briefly, is a project that has to do with redesigning the city, which has many, many levels and brings together the idea of a monument, an ancient aqueduct from the Roman times. So it brings together the whole idea of culture, of bringing to the surface something that is actually underground, but actually making people more conscious of it. And through this consciousness and building kind of more also community participation, basically using the water to support green areas and trees to lower temperatures. And that's where I will stop, because I could go on, and I'll come back.
Thank you, Leone. I think everybody wants everyone here to go on and on. It's wonderful experience that you're all sharing with us. And I actually think with that, I want to turn to a general question for everybody that would love to have a conversation around. But as we're doing that, please, everyone in the audience, feel free to add your questions to the chat, and we'll also address those as we go. But just in hearing from each of you, I'm just struck by there's the wide variety of people that are doing things on the ground and getting it done. And I wonder if, from that perspective, you have something that you could share about how to fund this effectively. There's so many different aspects of government and public sector and private sector engagement here. And if you had, your ideal situation, how would you direct the different aspects of the finance community to engage on heat in your location or in cities that you're familiar with? And I guess I will unfairly call on Mayor Gallego to start us off, but everyone else, please feel free to jump in and respond as well.
Wonderful. The city of Phoenix did some of our water work using a green bond. It was our first time issuing a green bond, and it was oversubscribed by 4 times, which was exciting for us because we like to take some risks. We did it in March of 2020, so right at the beginning of COVID. But it was wonderful to see the financial markets really interested in Phoenix, and some of our biggest debt holders are some of the people who are really leading the way in terms of pushing for both climate disclosure and sustainable finance. So that was a great success for us. We're doing a cool project that a little bit sounds like it has something to do with what Mayor Aki-Sawyerr is doing with the 600 young people. We have a residential tree equity accelerator. So for those of you who are not familiar with tree equity, it's a concept that American Forests developed, at least as I understand the history, and really looking at the correlation between healthy neighborhoods, wealth, and trees. So true in Phoenix, the neighborhoods with the lush tree canopies are much more likely to be wealthier neighborhoods, and our lower income neighborhoods are less likely to have major investments in trees. So Phoenix became the first US city to say, we're going to sign the American Forest Tree Equity Pledge and really be intentional about where we're planting our trees. They have a bunch of tools which we're developing with financial institutions, including Bank of America, to make sure we have the data to do this effectively. And then we are using federal American Rescue Plan funds to, our proposal is to do a tree equity accelerator where we plant up to 4 trees on residential property and then hire people from the community to maintain them. So hoping to create some of those green jobs, more community ownership, and produce a program that lowers residential energy bills, but also advances our goal of improving the shade canopy in Phoenix. In addition to using federal funds, we have a couple other models for funding it. So when we began the program, it was really funded with our general fund, which comes primarily from traditional funding, like those property tax bills you all love to pay. We've also launched a donation portal, and the hip thing to do for if you have someone in your life where you can never think of what to give them for the birthday, you can buy them trees in Phoenix. So we have a big bioscience community here, and one of our prominent cancer researchers turned 70. His Genomics Institute got him 70 trees at one of our local parks for his birthday. Our Sikh community, depending on how you pronounce it, donated 550 trees to celebrate the 550th anniversary of their guru. So it's been a neat way to bring the community and involved in your celebration and have a lasting impact in that area. We also have partners that have been very philanthropic. Next month, we'll be gathering with Aspiration, which is a very environmentally conscious financial institution. And if you're an Aspiration customer, you can donate or plant trees as part of your involvement with that company. And so they'll be planting trees in Phoenix. So we have a huge variety of different mechanisms to try to fund that. And we're excited to have many options. And if you want a tree in Phoenix, you can plant one.
Great.
Would others like to add to that? And just the wish list for how funders could better engage with your activities and implementation. That was a wonderful, diverse answer. I appreciate that.
So, you know, on tree planting, I just want to say we've also had these different private sponsorship, public-private partnerships on tree planting, both for tree planting activities in our parks and right-of-ways, as well as part of a tree giveaway program. And we've planted over 500,000 trees with that program in the last 10 years. However, our tree canopy percent in the last 6 years has stayed flat. We lose trees from Hurricane Irma, and we've lost trees from ongoing development. And planting trees in our right-of-way, we know we have work to do on make sure they're maintained properly. Mayor Aki-Sawyerr, I'm very interested in your program of full accounting and monitoring of those trees. While we have a tree inventory, I want them to become part of this county's balance sheet. All our physical assets, you know, even a small park bench is on that balance sheet, but a tree is not, and it's critical infrastructure. So it should be. So we're looking at that. We're looking on the emergency response side. We're partnered with Archtrack Resilience Center on a grant that we were able to secure through a FEMA Rebuild Florida grant, and to plan for converting our cooling centers into full service resilience hubs year round, and create a network between those and some portable resilience pods that the Archtrack Resilience Center has moved on. So we're looking forward to that. I think there is, as I mentioned earlier, also opportunities in addition to hazard mitigation FEMA dollars to work through utility programs on both the energy backup needs as well as efficiencies, low cost ways to keep housing cool. So those are some of the things in addition to what folks have mentioned. In all of this, I think data is critical because we need to be able to demonstrate the benefits in order to secure a green bond, for instance, like Mayor Gallego mentioned. You need very good data on the benefits, health, economic, et cetera, to be able to float a bond like that. So those are some of the things we're looking at.
And if I could just add as well, it's great to listen to Mayor Kate and Jane. So many similarities on the tree cover, but moving on to a slightly different heat reducing initiative, which we are doing with the Adrian Ash Rockefeller Resilience Institute, Resilience Center. We have a number of our markets in open air, street markets. And we have women who are sitting, well, not only women, but mainly predominantly women, sitting in the sun for hours at a time every day in the extreme heat. And it's only getting worse as temperatures rise. So working with Adrian Ash, our Chief Heat Officer, Eugenia Cargbo, and the team have devised or come across, I'm not sure they've designed it, but they've come across an idea which they floated to me the other day, and I think it's brilliant, of canopies. So we're going to be installing as a pilot in 3 of those markets. It's not plastic. The material has gone out of my head, but it's a canopy which will cover perhaps 100 to 150 women. It won't cover the whole market. And the idea there is that initial investment is coming as a grant. And on the point of financing, what's being proposed is that when the other traders see this, that there might be, well, the plan is to encourage the growth of a fund. So asking all the women to contribute 5,000 leones each, which is roughly just under 40 cents each, a week, towards building a fund so that the initial free canopy, free to those who are there, can then be extended across the markets. So that's financing at a very local level, and bringing in a really practical solution, which will reduce the heat burden on some of our most vulnerable residents.
That's fantastic. What I'm struck by is just the variety of different ways that this is getting funded right now. And I'm curious, Morgan, if I could turn to you, with your view of the sort of climate resilience and climate finance space writ large, are there other opportunities here that are already being applied to other aspects of this work that could be applied to heat? And where would you sort of guide folks if so?
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. And it's been really valuable to hear these and thinking about the wider landscape. And in 2020, CPI released with our STROC a paper on finance to urban adaptation. It was broader than just extreme heat. And in that context, you're exactly right. Taking a landscape of total finance, we found that finance to urban adaptation projects amounted to about $7 billion US. This was in 2017-18, the sort of years of analysis. But I think the approximate value applies, and that was across all sorts of different types of finance. To that end, multilateral DFIs provided the majority of urban adaptation finance that was tracked in this context. We're really looking at a developing country context, followed by government budgets and then agencies. And maybe two that come to mind based on your framing, Kurt, is one is parametric insurance. And this involves the standard premium payout structure of traditional insurance, but it bases the payout on the occurrence of a predetermined trigger event rather than the occurrence of loss and then submission of a claim. And I think parametric insurance has been applied in other contexts, but it can be and has been developed for extreme heat risks facing particular sectors. I'll offer just a couple of examples. Electric utilities seeking protection against financial risk of purchasing additional high-cost generating capacity to meet heightened demand during an extreme heat event is one instance of a use of parametric insurance. Another is for agricultural operations, maybe a little less relevant to our context here, but facing loss of particular high-value crops from extreme heat. And then finally, construction firms whose operations might be closed due to heat regulatory requirements in some jurisdictions is another example of the kind of operation that could leverage parametric insurance. So that's one example. And then the second final one I'll offer is servitization. I think servitization is a model for financing that applies across sectors. We're maybe most familiar with servitization in the context of consumer services. And one example of it that we've thought about at CPI is cooling as a service, which is an example of a sort of innovative financial instrument. And the idea is that a cooling equipment manufacturer continues to own and maintain the cooling assets, and that could be air conditioners, refrigerators, cold storage units, and they earn revenue by charging customers who could be municipal governments. It also could be other public actors or private users per unit of cooling used, and it allows the cooling customer to access the efficient cooling without the upfront costs and provides an incentive for customers who are paying per unit of cooling to efficiently consume the cooling. And it also ensures that the cooling equipment owner receives a steady operating cash flow and that the user then has a more reliable operating expenditure versus the upfront cost. So those two examples, parametric insurance and servitization, are two that come to mind to me, along with sort of a whole ecosystem of resilient finance solutions.
Great, thanks very much, Morgan. I see we have a couple questions in the chat, and so I wonder if folks want to ask their questions out loud, they're more than welcome to. Chris Quattro, I see you've got a couple there. If you're able to unmute and share your thoughts and questions, that would be great.
Yeah, let's see how this goes. So one of my questions, was related to how, like finding contractors. So for example, Mayor, when you were talking about having, using innovative paving materials, right? So I know in San Antonio, we tried to do something similar and we just couldn't find contractors who even knew how to use those paving materials. And so how have you all as city leaders overcome that challenge of just finding people responding to your RFPs who are able to rise to the challenge that you're putting to them?
That is a great question. And thank you so much for your leadership in San Antonio. I have the window open on the San Antonio project to read more about it as soon as we conclude this conversation. So cities learn so much from each other, and that's why I participate in important conversations like this. For our cool pavement, there are, as I understand it, a very limited number of companies that have developed a cool pavement project. And we have selected one vendor in particular. It's a spray, and there's a truck that goes through. So first we repave a city street to be up to good quality standards. And then we apply the cool pavement coating, and it's a truck with painting equipment. And it is not, while the material is new, the application was not so particularly novel that we couldn't find workforce in that area. I would say generally on sustainability, the LEAD program has been very important in Phoenix in terms of training professionals and then creating demand for that. The city was a leader in that we did a very large bond in 2006 that required a lot of LEAD construction, and that created demand. We had a very deep recession in 2008 with our real estate market that was very impacted. And the fact that the city had a bond and had the ability to do construction, our work was very highly sought after. And I think that sort of economic opportunity really inspired people to get the familiarity with both LEED design and construction. And that really difficult period of time for our city led to a lot of innovation and creating new workforce. We are hopeful to be able to do steps forward like that in our workforce without having to have a difficult recession. And right now we're trying to partner with our community college in particular to prepare for the workforce of the future. One of the areas we're focused on right now is electric vehicles. Phoenix and the greater Phoenix area is often called the Electric Valley because we have a very large concentration of EV companies. But we're a little bit short right now in the workforce. And so we are trying to put dollars into the community college to make it easier for them to train the workforce of the tomorrow. And we do partner as well with some of the union training programs who are doing some neat things to be very cutting edge in advanced construction. We're also trying through our Office of Innovation to support innovative companies that want to try things in the city of Phoenix. Sometimes our codes are an impediment, but we want to work with companies that we've had everything come through from straw bale construction. I think for many cities right now, machines that can help with building, particularly, we have a company called Diamond Grind 3D that will do cement houses with a lot of mechanization that's supposed to produce a $250,000 house and in a month, whereas it was taking 11 months with more traditional construction standards. And so we try to work with companies like that to locate. In that case, that company moved from a different state and 100% of their workforce was willing to come with them to Phoenix. So that was good news for us that people didn't say, oh, Phoenix, we don't want to move there. And we're excited to come to our community. And then we work with our workforce program to try to advertise and get them the workforce they need to scale.
Great, thank you, Mayor Gallego. Any other comments or responses to this question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add three things, and it looks like Mauricio wants to too. But one thing we've done is host resilient design trainings for contractors that go over our different resilient and sustainability requirements in our design, cool roofs, energy efficiency, flood resilience, and we're working on more things that could be related to heat, but that I think designing trainings for contractors is one. Another is to make sure in your procurement to include the qualification for green infrastructure, include the importance of a landscape architect on the team, no matter what kind of, whether it's a coastal seawall type infrastructure or coastal design, or it's a right of way, to make sure that expertise is a lead part of the team and well integrated. And then finally, there's Kurt knows this well, but Global Cool Cities Alliance that and Cool Roadways Partnership that has a lot of resources on standards and various companies that have been piloting cool surfaces like the one that Mayor Gallego was talking about, but many others that you can work with on pilot programs. So I encourage you to connect with them if you haven't already.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you for the shout out for Cool Roadways Partnership. Mauricio, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Kurt. So you have mentioned how there's a big lack of awareness about extreme heat-related risks, and that's a big problem. There's a figure that for me is really striking, and that is that during 2020, extreme heat killed 20 times more people than hurricanes in the US. Yet people don't know about it because extreme heat is not visually shocking. It's not the kind of thing that you see on the news. So I am wondering, since the 4 cities that are represented here today have taken a very important political step by appointing chief heat officers or creating a division within City Hall dedicated to address extreme heat, how important creating an institutional framework to tackle extreme heat has been in order to raise awareness about this issue, to convene multi-stakeholder participation, but also to look for funding for different extreme heat-related actions.
I can jump in and say that it's been extremely important for attracting serious players and funding to institutionalize and create departments that are more dedicated to these issues, but also to create strategic documents that have like a serious kind of an integrated way of approaching things. So for Athens, for example, this type of strategic document a few years ago managed to land a 55 million loan from the European Investment Bank. So, you know, being part of Europe has, for us, opens a whole series of windows for different types of funding that are very much kind of particular to the European setting. But the European Investment Bank is one of the banks that actually can fund a lot of things and is interested in funding a lot of things that supports building resilience in Europe and in European cities. So this has been the reason we managed to get this loan was because we did have a strategy, a resilience strategy that actually was able to anchor this loan and to kind of attract this type of funding. So I think it's very, and of course the strategy was created from having a department within the city that was able to put this thing together. So for heat, I think that to create these types of structures within the organization of the municipalities, and to create documents and the type of things that can then be voted through city council, which answers partially the discussion that started before also, like that kind of create the possibility of building capacity within the municipality and outside of it, that create that change the way that we do, that influence, if not change, but influence the way that we do procurement for different materials and for different approaches. All these things kind of have to have a very strong kind of institutional position within the municipality to advocate for them, and also to create the type, to produce the type of policies and the type of documents that can move these things forward.
I would say we've had very similar experience here. Having a permanent place in government means that philanthropic partners can feel comfortable working with us. We have the capacity to receive federal funds. The city of Phoenix is going out to our voters for a bond, very large bond package next year. The way we begin that process is soliciting all of our departments for project ideas and priorities, and having heat as a permanent part of government means that there's infrastructure there to be putting forward projects, and then equally important, implementing them should our voters give us the thumbs up to go forward. But I think a related point to how you set up the question, you talked about how many more people are losing their lives to heat than hurricanes. Just a pet project of mine I think I'm going to take on is in the United States, we have a federal emergency disaster declaration, and disasters can be hurricanes. The first one we've had in my time in Phoenix was for flooding, actually. We had a terrible period of flooding. We had residents. The one that impacted me most was there was a new mom who brought her baby home from the hospital to a completely gutted house because her home had just seen a torrent of rain. And I found it stressful to bring my baby home from the hospital when everyone was healthy, but forget about it if you have huge flood damage. So really deeply impactful. But right now we don't have we've never declared a federal disaster for heat. And if you looked at some of the events that we had in the Pacific Northwest in the United States, it sounds similar to some of the impacts that Athens has experienced. Chicago had a terrible heat event. So the federal government has never provided funding in our country for a heat-related event, and probably because no one's applying and realizing it's a designation. But in a world with such significant impacts from climate change, from my perspective, that needs to change.
And if I could just add that the situation in Freetown is very different. Sadly, we don't have access to loans such as the European Investment Bank, I wish we did, nor federal dollars flowing our way. But that said, you know, it makes the having a heat officer, chief heat officer, and what we've done, we haven't created a heat department, but we've created a climate change department for the first time in the city. And at the level of the council, i.e. the elected officials, for the first time, we've actually created a climate change committee of councillors. So they are able, the chief heat officer is able to work within that structure, that framework. And this is really critical, as has been said already by the earlier speakers. It's really critical for ensuring that there's that focused attention given to data, and the data is needed in order to be more effective in seeking to mobilize funds and resources. I would guess perhaps a little bit more of a difficult challenge for us, but just as important.
Thank you. Those are very helpful answers. I see in the chat here, we've David Dodman, you have a question related to insurance and worker protections. I'm wondering if you're available, if you'd like to share that question.
Yeah, I'm here, and thanks everyone. This has been really a fantastic session. I was struck by a comment from Leone talking about when we have a category or warning for hurricanes, we don't expect people to continue delivering pizzas or working in fields, but that we don't have anything like that for heat. And then I was struck by Morgan's comment about parametric insurance and the circumstances in which there actually are mechanisms for compensation based around heat or heat indices. But my observation, which leads to a question, is that, of course, in many cities around the world, of which Freetown is a very good example, a substantial proportion of workers are in the informal sector. And of course, if they are not able to work for any reason, for ill health, for a storm, or for heat, you have a significant gap in the ability of people to earn their livings and to support their families. So what I was going to ask is whether Leone or whether Mayor Aki-Sawyerr, whether you have experiences of working with unions or alliances of workers, including confederations or councils of informal workers or contract workers, and any potential mechanisms for compensation for lost income if there is a circumstance in which extreme heat is indeed threatening to health or to life. And Morgan, whether there are, I know that in smallholder agriculture, for example, there are some really quite innovative parametric insurance schemes for smallholder agriculture and losses based around whether avoiding the moral hazard, of course, from encouraging people not to work or not to harvest, and whether you've come across any examples of innovative parametric insurance that go to people or associations of people who are often marginalized or excluded, and that are accessible beyond formal firms and formal commercial insurance markets. So I'd be interested in reflections on that from any of the three of you.
Well, shall I start? In respect of the informal sector, and it's actually just picking up on something that Mayor Kate just said as well, that with the flooding being the most devastating and the one for which declarations have been made, we are still in a position, which seems really bizarre because extreme heat is such a feature of our experience increasingly in Freetown, but we're still in a position where people aren't thinking about heat as a disaster. It's insidious, it's unseen, it's quiet, and it actually builds upon so much else that people experience. So I would say, David, that we actually don't have, the starting point is we don't have an insurance culture. Most people, the vast majority, I'm guessing, but I think it's probably a very good guess, that over 90% of our residents do not take out insurance for anything. And in this environment of increased disasters, the burden continues to fall on the city. We experience frequent fires, which are exacerbated by the heat. We're more likely to have flooding as something that people are going to respond to and keep them away from work. But we haven't had a situation where it's been so hot that no one could go to work. And maybe that would be something that would trigger a collective action. But to date, the experiences are very individual. But we have a bigger problem to solve, which is one in the current climate system, the sort of where we sit within the current climate crisis. It's becoming an urgent issue. And that is for insurance to become more of a part of the financial sort of landscape of our city for individuals. There's a real need because the exposure is increasing every day, losses are happening, and there's nowhere to turn to but to us. I mean, one of the things we talked about today offline is really having, putting out a press statement, engaging our utility company, which that's a different story altogether, contribute in some degree because of poor transmission lines, but we have had 40 fires in the last 12 months. And since this year began, I feel as if we've had at least 1 or 2 fires every week. And there's no insurance. So people are just devastated. So to answer your question, it is not there yet, but I can see that it's increasingly going to be important as climate change continues to bite.
I wonder if others have a
I
response
think
as
that
well.
I was, oh, sorry,
Go
Kurt.
ahead. Go ahead, please.
So I think that's an amazingly important question, and thank you for it. I totally would agree with Mayor Aki-Sawyerr. In Athens, we also have a society that doesn't take out insurance. People are not insured in Greece almost at all. The burden falls all the time on the local government or other levels of government to deal with fires or with extreme heat events. And people, losing jobs or being injured, which we know injuries go up during extreme heat events as well, a lot work-related injuries. So, and also talking about the delivery people are totally informal, part of the informal economy in Greece. They don't have any fallback kind of support. So they, I mean, I haven't dealt with this, but many times they are going on strike. I mean, every time that there is a big heat wave, the delivery people, or if there is, other issues like, extreme weather events, they go on strike asking for some kind of support for all of because it's so difficult to be working under these conditions. So we have a new minister of climate crisis, and who was just appointed. The ministry was created, and the minister was appointed in September. And one of the things that he was discussing was that this kind of culture of insurance has really to come into the country on many different levels to support the weak parts of society, and to kind of be working in a way together with governments in order to do this type of to have this type of effects. And finally, what was the final thing I want to say? It's almost 11 in the night, so my brain is a little slow. I had one last thing to say. Well, if I remember it, I might jump in, but I can't remember it right now. Oh, yes. Last year, when we had the big heat wave, it was the first time that I mean, maybe in previous heat waves, but I can't really remember. But last year was very clear. The minister, the prime minister, came out and actually declared that people should not go to their jobs. Like actually, so the people would keep getting their payments, but for specific hours and for days. Eventually, also they weren't to go to the jobs, but they were to be paid. So this was like something that has to be also established, like how these types of things can work somehow. Yeah, but it's a big issue.
Yeah, great. Well, maybe one further thought from my side. And thank you. I think it's a really interesting question and thought-provoking. The only thing I would add is that CPI is also the Secretariat of the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance. We're an incubator program of climate finance instruments. And one of the instruments that's currently going through the lab process this year is the climate insurance linked resilient infrastructure financing. And it's an idea for long-term insurance solution linked with financing for climate resilient infrastructure in cities. And it's being developed by the UN Capital Development Fund and a working group of insurers and cities and investors and other experts. And the aim would be that it would enable cities to access affordable 10 to 15-year climate insurance with prearranged premiums, in part to bring protection to places that don't have access to traditional capital markets, and that it would be contingent upon cities' commitment to invest in climate resiliency, funded via issuance of separate financial products to be determined. And the cities would have access to post-disaster liquidity to support recovery, including potentially to extreme heat events. The it doesn't perfectly answer your question. The beneficiaries in the structure as envisioned wouldn't be the informal workers, but I think it gets at some of the same underlying risks. And so anyways, and I think it's a helpful thought as we're working on this instrument in the coming, as this instrument goes forward, hopefully in the coming years, to really be thinking strongly about how informal workers and others can be covered and benefited across extreme heat and other climate risks. And as it begins to pilot, to ensure that that's part of the consideration, really for any insurance product, but particularly for this one. So, yeah, just noting that climate insurance linked resilient infrastructure financing idea.
Thanks all. We've got a number of questions in the chat. I'm going to ask if Ling Chen is available, if they could ask their question.
Yeah, so I see the 4 cities all participate in different kinds of city networks, like the C40. So I was curious, wondering what something participating in city networks can help the city achieve something that they cannot achieve on their own. Thank you.
That's a wonderful question. C40 has been a really great resource for us in Phoenix. I mentioned, I think in my opening comments that Mayor Aki-Sawyerr and I were together with Mayor Costas at the C40 convening as part of the summit that the United Nations had in Glasgow. And it was wonderful for us to trade ideas about how heat was working. I also get to work through a different network with Jane's leadership team. But we really do learn from each other. What are the metrics you're using around heat and impact? How are you tracking trees? C40 has helped us with our climate action plan and making sure we understand the best practices, but also that we use standardized systems so we can compare with each other. It's also been wonderful for elevating the role of cities. The first major commitment announced at Glasgow was more than 1,000 cities saying we would commit to net zero. So before national governments made any of their announcements, cities were really there leading the way. And that was a big point of pride for all of us. In the United States, when our national government decided to go in a different direction from the Paris Accords, cities stepped up and said, we are going to continue to commit to those goals. For us in Phoenix, we are the 5th largest city in the United States, and we are the city that's added the most people for the last several census updates. So fastest growing large city. Reducing emissions while you're growing at that pace is very difficult, and we really need partnerships and tools to understand how we can most effectively impact our money or invest our money to make a difference on the climate side. And so learning from other cities have really helped us on some of our renewable energy deployment. European commitments really helped us understand what was possible and move forward. In Phoenix, we do a lot of work on circular economy. So things that used to go to the landfill, how can we make them the feedstocks of the businesses of the future? And the C40 network has been helpful for us with that. We also participate in a portion of the C40 network specifically around cool cities and heat. And again, those exchanges have been enormously valuable to Phoenix.
Mayor Aki-Sawyerr, I wonder if we could ask you the same question. I'm just thinking about the wide array of groups that you've worked with to marshal support for the work you're doing on heat in Freetown, and what you might be able to educate us on there.
Thanks. So as Mayor Gallego has said, we were both on C40s, and I would say that's definitely one of the biggest network platforms for us in terms of impact, but it's, as you've mentioned, not the only one. We are also involved in the Mayor's Migration Council, which you think, what's the relationship between that and heat? Well, a lot of migration that's going on now is climate induced, and therefore there is a direct link. And that's in the same way that Mayor Gallego Gallego, why am I having a problem with your name today, Kate? I'm just going to call you Kate. The same, it's late here too. The same way that she's just described, it applies to all of our networks, whether it's UCLG or mayors, Parliament of Mayors. The most important aspect or feature of these networks is the sharing of information, sharing of experiences, the setting of benchmarks, and dare I say also some of the moral encouragement that we get from being partners on what can sometimes be a very difficult journey within our nations. So the city networks have been incredibly helpful, and they definitely help us to amplify, help us to grow, network, access funding, get technical support, write papers, raise the stakes. Yeah, the networks are helpful, definitely very helpful.
Any other thoughts on that question from others?
Well,
Great.
I'll just say that, in terms of networks, my first city network was the 100 Resilient Cities Network, now the Resilient Cities Network. That's how I first met Leone while I was at the city of Miami. But I think, they all of them, C40, while I was at the city of Miami, I was involved with that, and certainly Urban Sustainability Network. And even though Archrock is not a formal network, it is serving that role in this heat space. And in each one, it's been a catalyst for action at the leadership level to really look at these issues in a new way and really push them towards greater goals, and providing the resources and backup tools, exchange, et cetera, to help them get there, building the staff capacity and building those resources. It's been critical, both on the adaptation and the mitigation side. There's also some healthy competition that comes out of it. So it's all good.
It's a great point, Jane. I see, LaShawn Jefferson, you have your hand up. Can I turn the floor over to you for your question?
So thank you, and I'll lower my hand. So this has been such a wonderful panel. I came to it late, but was happy to hear so many of the interventions. And I wanted to return to a question that Mauricio has posed often, and that came up in this panel as well, which is the urgency of this and the issue of raising public awareness. And I had a question that any of the mayors can answer, which is about how different affected constituencies and stakeholders are being connected. Because as I listen to your various comments, I see obvious possibilities that must already be being involved, related to public health and economic development, elder care, informal workers. And so in terms of building an argument about the urgency of this, you can imagine that on one hand, it affects everyone. On the other hand, it affects some people much more acutely than others. So as our colleague from Athens mentioned, in terms of pizza delivery in Athens, and having spent a little bit of time in Athens, it's very much an informal economy. There's no protection for those people. Similarly in Freetown, market women, I don't say that in a disparaging way, but women who work in the market and who sell their goods, who are their own employers. So I think there's an economic justice or an economic component of this that could facilitate increasing the sense of its urgency, and that kind of everyone is affected, from the most vulnerable to others. But I wanted to get a sense of like how you all are connecting those networks for the benefit of policy alignment and policy prioritization.
Well, you mentioned Freetown, so I'll give it a start. It's a really good point. The climate justice is an issue for all of climate change. Inevitably, the most vulnerable are the least financially secure, the most exposed, and that's actually often the source of their vulnerability. So you're quite right that extreme heat is going to affect the woman in the market more than the professional with air conditioning in their home and in their car. At the moment, as we start this journey, because we are very clear that our involvement with City Champions for Heat Action and the Ash Rock Center has been over the last year, and has within our own city been a catalyst for escalating the significance of this issue within the city. So we're working through a process, and I would say that the way we're bringing everybody on board is probably more through our data collection and our messaging. We've never reported on heat. We give alerts for flooding. We give alerts for heavy rainfall. We give alerts for the tide because, we're a coastal city. We have a lot of communities that live on right in the water almost. But one of the things that we're going to be looking to do now is to be in a position to give alerts on heat. But that requires some pre-work, which we're embarking on with the help of Ash Rock. But going beyond that, coming specifically to this question of how we ensure that there's equity, I suppose, in short, by focusing on where the vulnerability is, but making sure the messaging is going to everyone. We've got some catch up to do on heat, and I think that's the case with most of the players in the space. So we have this in our minds as we embark on this journey.
I think you specifically mentioned Freetown, but I will jump in from the Phoenix perspective as well. As we do work in this area, we try to reach the breadth of the city as much as possible. We just updated our climate action plan, and we tried to do meetings based on geography, but also language. So Phoenix is 40% Latino, and we have a large number of our residents who speak Spanish. So we translated the plan into Spanish and facilitated meetings in Spanish. One of the things we are trying to do very intentionally as we make green investments is also try to hire the people who are in the communities where we are investing. So I mentioned our tree planting program. We're also trying to do that as we invest in our transit system. So right now we are tripling our light rail system and we have challenged our partners in that area to hire along the areas where we're making investment in track and to really give us regular data about who they are hiring, the background and the geography. We have done really well in hiring people who live along the corridor. We had a goal related to women, which we have not yet hit for that construction project, but we're really hoping to have those local partners who understand and can help us have a better project because people know their neighborhoods really well. One of the new partnerships we've done is through Bloomberg Philanthropies, and they have helped us with our procurement to try to, instead of getting one big company to do the entire city, how do we work with small businesses to get them involved? We're trying to invest in a greener city, and we are now working with more small business landscaping partners. I hope that means the more people we know who understand sustainable landscaping and green infrastructure because they're exposed to the city's programs and standards. And I also hope that getting a great long-term contract with the city helps them finance and grow their business and also maybe build champions for our green and climate programs as well.
My overall point, by the way, is that I wouldn't say they're unlikely alliances, but there's some alliances that can be built among people who are interested in elder care and people who are interested in informal economy and immigrant workers and public health issues that could build momentum for this becoming a better recognized emergency.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually making a couple of presentations in the next couple of weeks to alliances that are focused on older adults as part of our heat season campaign outreach. Similar to what Mayor Gallego mentioned in our public outreach workshops, particularly focused on outdoor workers and housing. We had translators in both Spanish and Haitian Creole. And for our overall task force, we did a broad recruitment where we wanted to have at least a couple of representatives that had lived experience in heat exposure, either in their own home or at their workplace or some combination, because we know those are the most exposed and vulnerable. But I think this is an ongoing mandate that we need to make sure. And even our emergency management protocols are first focused on the unhoused to make sure we have all the our emergency management personnel and disaster volunteers to reach out to them and get them into the right facilities.
Yeah, and just to add just a couple of thoughts to that, the way that Jane and I, at least, and to a large extent, a lot of cities from this point onward, the way that we design the different type of initiatives and the different type of actions usually includes, basically entails co-designing it with the different types of communities that are the ones that will be most affected and are the ones that we need to kind of take care and make sure that their needs are met. So this is kind of an ongoing process, as she said, like, you know, we identify which are the vulnerable communities and then really kind of try to have workshops together with them and try to figure out with a lot of different stakeholders what we can design that is best suited to the needs that are happening in the particular kind of sector for heat, for example. But as you said, it also has to do with bringing other kind of players in so that you can support the effort from different communities and from different parts of the city.
It's a great question, and I just can't help but add that, you know, I think it points out the real power that you can have by thinking more broadly about coalitions built around these things. I can tell you in California right now, around the heat legislation that's being considered at the state level, the support for that goes to everything from the AARP focused on older Americans to ASPCA, which is the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And so it really does point out that there's power in those sort of diverse and broad constituencies. I do see that we're at the time, and I want to give some time back to Mauricio and Jeannie to wrap up. But I want to thank this amazing panel for your time, for your day, and for your evening in some cases, and for your wonderful experience that you've shared. If ever there was a panel where the moderator should just stay out of the way, this is the one. So I really appreciate everything you shared with us today, and I'll turn it back over to the folks at UPenn.
Thank you so much, Kurt. This has been really a fantastic discussion, very inspiring one. We've heard, extraordinary leaders taking bold and innovative action on the ground to protect people from extreme heat-related risks, to protect the economy, to protect jobs. So we're very grateful for you. I think this has been a very illuminating conversation. Thank you,